If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I first met Julian Croft, that I'd be his best man, I would have laughed. If they'd told me I'd be secretly, hopelessly in love with him, I would have walked away without a word, a hot flush of shame already crawling up my neck. And if they'd told me that on the morning of his wedding, he would shatter my entire world with a single confession, I would have thought them completely insane. Yet here I was, standing in the cold, impersonal grandeur of a hotel suite that cost more per night than my rent, the evidence of all three prophecies laid out before me. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet moments. It was the smell of old paper and binding glue in the city archive where I worked. It was the precise alignment of books on my shelves, the predictable bloom of the orchid on my windowsill, the solitary pleasure of a first coffee in the pale morning light. I had built my world like a fortress, small and defensible, with walls made of routine and solitude. It was safe. It was mine. And then there was Julian. Julian was not quiet. He was a force of nature, a disruption to my carefully calibrated peace. He was laughter that echoed in hallways, a confident stride that commanded attention, a presence that filled every room he entered until the very air seemed to vibrate with his energy. He was my best friend, a fact that still, after all this time, felt like a statistical anomaly, a glitch in the universe. I saw him first at the rehearsal dinner the night before. He stood across the opulent, flower-draped room, a champagne flute in his hand, looking every bit the part of the handsome, successful groom. He was encased in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, his dark hair perfectly styled, a disarming smile fixed on his face as he spoke to his future father-in-law. From this distance, he was a portrait of masculine perfection, an advertisement for a life I couldn't comprehend. His fiancée, Clara, was at his side. She was lovely, intelligent, and kind. She was everything a woman like her was supposed to be, and she looked at Julian with an adoration that was as bright and uncomplicated as a sunbeam. It made my stomach clench into a tight, cold knot. They looked perfect together, a match set, and I, in my ill-fitting Reynolds suit, was the odd, dissonant piece that didn't belong. The distance between us was more than the physical space of that ballroom. It was a chasm carved by a decade of my silence. It was the unspoken truth that hung in the air every time we were alone, a truth I had buried so deep within myself I sometimes managed to forget was there. He was my friend, my straight best friend, who was about to marry a wonderful woman. That was the reality. My feelings were a private sickness, a ghost that haunted only me. Later that night, the carefully constructed dam of my composure began to crack. After the dinner, after the endless toasts and polite smiles, Julian found me by the elevators. He looked frayed, the perfect smile gone, replaced by a deep line of tension between his brows. "Leo," he said, his voice low and rough. I can't go back to my room." I frowned. "Is Clara not there?" "No, she is. And my parents, and her parents, they're all staying on the same floor. It's too much. The questions, the fussing. I feel like I can't breathe." He ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up. It was the first real thing I'd seen him do all night. "Your suite. It's on a different floor, right? The hotel manager said they put you on the executive level, a perk of being the best man, apparently. A quiet, isolated floor. My fortress. Yes, I managed. Can I crash with you? Just for tonight. I'll take the couch. I just need some quiet." He looked at me, and for the first time, the confident, action-oriented facade I knew so well dissolved. What was left was something raw and pleading. He was asking for sanctuary. In my fortress, my heart began a frantic, stupid thrumming. "Of course," I said, my voice betraying none of the internal chaos. "Of course, Julian," and so, the external event beyond my control had occurred. The walls of my fortress were breached. He followed me into the elevator, the silence between us thick and heavy. The disruption of my routine was absolute. I was no longer just an observer at the edge of his life. I was now at its very epicenter, in a shared space on the eve of his wedding. My quiet, predictable world had just been invaded by the one person who could destroy it completely. The suite was obscenely large. A sitting area with a plush sofa, a desk, a king-sized bed, and a wall of windows overlooking the glittering, indifferent city. Julian dropped his suit jacket onto a chair and let out a long, ragged sigh. He looked smaller without the jacket, less like the imposing figure from the ballroom and more like the boy I'd met in college, the one who used to fall asleep in the library with his head on a pile of law books. "Thank you," he murmured, sinking onto the sofa and loosening his tie. He didn't look at me. He stared out the window, at the river of headlights flowing far below. "It's fine," I said, my voice too stiff. It busied myself by unpacking the few things I'd brought, arranging my toiletries on the marble vanity in the bathroom. Routine. Control. Find a control. When I came back out, he was still there, but he'd kicked off his shoes and was rubbing his temples. The perfect groom was gone. In his place was a man who looked exhausted down to his bones. I saw the faint, silvery scar just above his eyebrow, a relic from a childhood soccer injury he'd told me about years ago. I noticed the way his shoulders slumped, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with posture. I saw the weariness in his eyes, a deep, profound sadness that his public smile had so expertly concealed. "Do you want a drink?" I asked, gesturing to the minibar. "Water? Something stronger." He shook his head. "No, just quiet." I nodded and retreated to the far side of the room, pretending to read a hotel magazine. But I wasn't reading. I was watching him, observing him in this new, unguarded state. The air was thick with everything he wasn't saying. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a living thing, full of tension. It pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. After a long while, he started fumbling with his cufflinks. One of them fell, glinting as it rolled under the edge of the sofa. "Damn it," he muttered, bending down awkwardly in his fitted trousers. "I'll get it," I said, moving before I could think. I knelt on the floor, my hands searching the plush carpet. My fingers brushed against something cool and metallic. At the exact same moment, Julian, still leaning down, reached under as well. His hand covered mine. It wasn't a brush. It wasn't a fleeting accident. For a split second, his palm was pressed firmly against the back of my hand. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. It was like touching a live wire. Heat flooded my entire body, a dizzying, terrifying rush. My heart, which had been thrumming, became a frantic, trapped bird, beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. I could feel the calluses on his palm, the slight roughness of his skin against mine. It was the most real thing I had felt in a decade. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. I think I actually gasped. Julian froze, his hand still under the couch. He slowly straightened up, his face unreadable in the dim light. He had the cufflink. He didn't look at me. "Thanks," he said, his voice strained. "No problem." My own voice was a strangled whisper. I scrambled back to my feet, retreating to the safety of the other side of the room. My hand tingled, burned. I shoved it in my pocket, as if to hide the evidence of the contact. My entire system was in revolt. Panic. Salt. Heat. Every alarm bell in my body was screaming. This was dangerous territory. This was the edge of a cliff I had spent years avoiding. He finished undressing, stripping off his shirt. He was careful to turn away from me, but I saw the taut muscles of his back, the sharp line of his spine. He pulled a t-shirt and sweats from the small overnight bag he'd brought. I tried to focus on a magazine in my hands, but the words were just black squiggles on a glossy page. The image of his hand on mine was burned into my mind. The sensation was branded onto my skin. He finally broke the silence again, his back still to me. "I feel like I'm drowning. Leo." The words were so quiet I almost missed them. I lowered the magazine. "What?" He turned around. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt now, looking less like a groom and more like my friend again. But the look in his eyes was one I'd never seen before. It was sheer, undiluted panic. "This whole thing," he said, gesturing vaguely, as if to encompass the hotel, the wedding, his entire life. "It's like I'm standing on a stage, reading lines from a script I didn't write. And everyone is applauding, but I don't know the story. I don't know why I'm here." Suddenly, the power dynamic shifted. He wasn't the confident, all-powerful Julian. He was lost. He was asking for help. And I The anxious, overthinking Leo was the only one here. I was the one on solid ground. For a moment, my own anxieties were eclipsed by his. "Julian," I said, my voice steady now. I took a step toward him. "It's just nerves. It's a huge life change." Even as I said the words, they felt hollow, untrue. He shook his head, a bitter, humorless smile twisting his lips. Is that all it is?" He looked at me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "You know me better than anyone. Do I look like a man who's just nervous?" I didn't answer, because the answer was no. He looked like a man being led to his own execution. He looked trapped. "You're my best man," he said, the words laced with a strange, dark irony. "You're supposed to help me, to support me." He took a step closer to me, closing the space I had so carefully tried to maintain. "So help me, Leo. Tell me what to do." My heart was hammering again, but for a different reason. This wasn't about a fleeting touch anymore. This was about everything. He was placing his entire life, his entire crisis, in my hands. I, who could barely manage my own quiet existence, was being asked to navigate the wreckage of his. The playing field wasn't just level. It had been completely upended. He was vulnerable, and I was, somehow, the one in a position of power, and I had no idea what to do with it. The silence stretched, thin and taut as a wire. The city lights outside painted moving patterns on the walls, the only motion in the still, heavy air of the hotel room. We were in our own private bubble, 30 floors above the world, in an intimate, isolated space that felt miles away from the wedding, from Clara, from reality. He didn't move away. He just stood there, waiting for an answer I didn't have. His vulnerability was a raw, open wound. It stripped away the last of his defenses, the confident persona he wore like armor. "I can't tell you what to do, Julian," I finally whispered. The words felt inadequate, cowardly. "Why not?" he shot back, his voice raw with desperation. "You're the smart one, the observer. You see everything. You see me, don't you? I see you so clearly it hurts." The thought was a scream in my mind, but I couldn't say it. I couldn't betray the decade of careful friendship, the unspoken pact of my silence. "It's your life?" I said, my voice barely audible. He let out a sharp, broken sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Is it? It doesn't feel like it. It feels like a story that was written for me by my parents, by their expectations. Find a good firm, make partner, marry a suitable woman from a good family, have 25 kids and a house in the suburbs." He recited the list with a chilling lack of emotion, as if reading an obituary. "I've checked every box, Leo. Every single one. And I feel nothing. No, that's not true. I feel wrong. Like I'm wearing someone else's skin." He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He was so close now, I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could smell the faint, clean scent of the hotel soap on his skin. My own breath hitched in my chest. He looked down at my hands, which were clenched into fists at my sides. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and touched my fist, his fingers gently prying mine open. He threaded his fingers through mine, our palms pressing together. This time, I didn't pull away. I couldn't. The jolt was still there, but now was a current of devastating warmth, a feeling of coming home to a place I'd never been. "The only time it ever felt right," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "the only time I ever felt like myself was with you, the world tilted on its axis." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. This was it. The confession. Not the one I ever expected. Not in this way. It wasn't about love, not yet. It was about identity. About truth. "Julian," my voice broke. "Don't," he whispered, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "Don't say it's just friendship. Don't tell me I'm confused. I've been confused for 10 years. Tonight, I'm finally starting to feel clear." He lifted his other hand and gently touched my face, his palm cupping my jaw. His skin was warm, a little rough. His touch was hesitant, questioning. My entire body was trembling, a leaf in a hurricane. I felt a tear escape mine and trace a hot path down my cheek. He brushed it away with his thumb. "All this time," he murmured, his eyes searching mine, full of a decade of unspoken things. "All this time, I was running toward this life I was supposed to want. And every time I looked over my shoulder, you were there. The one real thing. The only thing that made sense. He started to lean in, his gaze dropping to my lips. It was happening in slow motion, every fractional movement magnified. My mind was screaming, a chaotic chorus of "this is a mistake," and "don't stop." The fear was a physical thing, a cold dread in my stomach. But the longing was a tidal wave, washing it all away. This was the turning point. The consummation of a decade of silent yearning. His lips touched mine. It wasn't a frantic, passionate kiss. It was slow. It was hesitant. It was questioning. It was the most honest kiss of my life. His lips were soft, uncertain. It was a kiss that asked a question. Is this okay? For a moment, we just stayed there, a gentle pressure, a shared breath. Then I answered. I leaned into him, my hand coming up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. I could feel it beating, a frantic, wild rhythm that matched my own. The kiss deepened, but it was still tender, still full of a devastating gentleness. It was a kiss of relief, of discovery. It tasted of salt from my tears and a deep, soul-crushing sorrow for all the years we had lost. I felt a sob building in my chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated release. It was the sound of my fortress walls crumbling to dust. He pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against mine. We were both breathing heavily, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. His eyes were closed. Leo. He breathed my name like a prayer, like an apology. The wedding. I whispered, the word tasting like poison. Julian, the wedding is in 10 hours. He opened his eyes. They were clear, the confusion gone, replaced by a terrifying certainty. I know, he said. And then he kissed me again, and this time there was no hesitation. There was only us. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through a gap in the curtains. For a blissful, disoriented second, I didn't know where I was. There was a warmth behind me, a solid weight, an arm draped loosely over my waist. The scent of his skin, clean and masculine, filled my senses. Then memory crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. Julian, the confession, the kiss. My heart stuttered. I lay perfectly still, afraid to breathe, afraid to move and break the spell. We had fallen asleep on top of the covers of the king-size bed, still mostly clothed, tangled together like shipwreck survivors clinging to a raft. After the second kiss, there had been more. Desperate, clinging touches, frantic whispers, a clumsy, earnest exploration in the dim light, fueled by a decade of repression. It was messy and beautiful and heartbreaking. I turned my head just enough to see him. He was asleep, his face relaxed and younger in the soft light. The line of tension between his brows was gone. He looked peaceful. For a moment, a fierce, protective wave of love washed over me, so potent it stole my breath. And then the anxiety began, a small, cold trickle that quickly became a flood. What had we done? The wedding. The word echoed my mind, a death knell. In a few hours, hundreds of people would be gathering. Clara would be putting on her dress. The flowers were arranged. The cake was waiting. This wasn't some small mistake. This was a catastrophe. My stomach filled with a swarm of angry bees. This was a mistake. His mistake. A last-minute panic, a moment of weakness, and I was the vessel for it. He would wake up, the clarity of night replaced by the harsh reality of the morning, and he would be filled with regret, with disgust. He would look at me and see the person who almost let him ruin his life. The self-recrimination was a bitter acid in my throat. I had let this happen. I had wanted it so badly that I ignored every red flag, every warning sign. I had let my selfish, secret desires shatter the most important friendship of my life. When he left this room, he wouldn't just be leaving for his wedding. He would be leaving me, for good this time. The silence that would follow would be permanent. I had to get out. Carefully, millimeter by millimeter, I began to extricate myself from his hold. I lifted his arm, heavy with sleep, and slid out from under it. The loss of his warmth was immediate and sharp. I stood by the bed, my body trembling, my clothes rumpled and smelling of him. I looked at his peaceful face, and my heart broke all over again. I fled to the bathroom and stood under a scalding shower, trying to wash away the feeling of his skin on mine, the taste of his lips, the hope that had so stupidly bloomed in my chest. It was no use. The sensations were imprinted on me, a permanent record of my own folly. When I came out, dressed in fresh clothes, the room was empty. The bed was empty. He was gone. A wave of nausea and dizziness washed over me. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. Gone. No note. No word. He had just vanished. The abrupt departure I had feared was a reality. He had woken up and fled. Fled from me. Fled back to his real life. The morning after anxiety I predicted wasn't just a spiral of doubt. It was a black hole, sucking all the air and light from the room. My solitude, once a comfort, was now a gaping wound. The silence in the suite was no longer just a weight. It was a physical presence, a suffocating entity that mocked me. It was the sound of my future. Emptiness. Absence. I walked over to the closet where my best man's suit was hanging in a plastic bag. The crisp black fabric seemed to mock me. I was supposed to stand beside him, to smile, and watch him pledge his life to someone else, all while carrying the secret of last night like a hot coal in my gut. The thought was unbearable. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost its meaning. My phone was silent on the nightstand. I imagined his phone, buzzing with calls from his mother, from Clara. "Where are you? It's your wedding day." He was with them now. He was explaining, apologizing for being out of touch. He was getting ready. He was putting on his own suit, fixing his tie, preparing the smile he would wear as he walked down the aisle. And I was here in the wreckage. The silence was absolute. I tried to call him once, my thumb hovering over his name in my contacts. My finger trembled. I couldn't do it. What would I even say? Was last night real? Are you still getting married? The questions were pathetic, needy. I closed my phone and threw it on the bed. The absence of him was a physical ache. The suite, which had felt like a sanctuary last night, now felt like a prison cell. The indentation of his head was still on the pillow next to mine. I could still smell him on the sheets. Every detail was a fresh twist of the knife. My former life, my quiet, orderly existence, seemed like a distant paradise I could never return to. It was tainted now, forever colored by this brief, catastrophic explosion of intimacy. I had tasted connection, real connection, and now the solitude I had once cherished was just loneliness. I sank onto the sofa, the same spot where he had confessed his drowning feeling. Now I was the one underwater, the pressure crushing my chest, the silence roaring in my ears. He had made his choice. He had woken up, faced the dawn, and chosen the life that was expected of him. And I was the casualty, the collateral damage of his moment of doubt. The clock on the nightstand read 10 a.m. The wedding was at noon. It was over. I had to get out of the suit. I couldn't wear it. I couldn't stand there and watch him. It would destroy what little was left of me. With a surge of desperate energy, I went to the closet and tore the suit from its hanger. I was fumbling with the buttons of my own shirt, ready to change into my regular clothes and just walk away, disappear from his life before he could formally banish me from it, when the door to the suite burst open. It was Julian. He wasn't in a suit. He was still wearing the t-shirt and sweats from last night. His hair was a mess, his eyes were wild, and he was breathing like he'd run up all 30 flights of stairs. He looked panicked, hunted, and more resolute than I had ever seen him. He saw me standing there with the suit in my hands, and his face crumpled with relief and fear. "Now, thank God. I thought you'd be gone." I just stared at him, my heart doing a painful, lurching thing in my chest. I was frozen, unable to process his presence. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just in front of me. "I'm so sorry," he gasped, his hands coming up to grip my arms, as if to make sure I was real. "I woke up and you were gone, and I panicked. Then my mother called and my phone just exploded, and I had to go. I had to end it. I couldn't do it over the phone." The words tumbled out of him in a frantic rush. I was still trying to catch up. "End it," I whispered. "The wedding," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "Clara, all of it." I went to her room. I told her. He flinched, a wave of pain crossing his face. "It was awful, Leo. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. She's a good person. She deserves better than a man who's in love with someone else, in love with someone else. The words hung in the air between us, shimmering and terrifying. Then my parents, he continued, his grip on my arms tightening. It was a war. Yelling. Accusations. My father. He said he didn't know who I was anymore. A raw, vulnerable look flashed in his eyes. I told him he was right. He doesn't. This was the return. Not a retreat, but a full frontal assault on his old life. He hadn't been running from me. He had been running for me. He had been choosing. I'm so scared, he admitted, his voice cracking. The strong, silent facade was utterly gone, leaving only the terrified, honest man beneath. I've just blown up my entire life. I have no idea what I'm doing. But the only thing that felt more terrifying than doing it was the thought of you standing in this room, thinking I'd left you. Thinking last night was a mistake. The suit slipped from my numb fingers and fell to the floor in a heap. Was it? I asked, my voice trembling. A mistake? No, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He shook his head, a fierce, definitive movement. No, the mistake was the last 10 years. The mistake was almost walking down that aisle. The mistake was almost losing you. This was it. The clarifying conversation. The moment where we both had to acknowledge the frightening new world we had just created. I'm scared too, I confessed, the words a monumental relief to finally speak aloud. I thought you regretted it. I thought you were gone. Never, he said, his voice a raw vow. Not from you. Never again. He let go of my arms and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. The same connection from a night before, but this time it wasn't a question. It was a statement, an anchor. He looked around the opulent, impersonal suite, then back at me. A small, weary smile touched his lips. I don't belong here anymore, he said. This isn't my life. He tugged gently on my hand. Let's get out of here. Just go. Anywhere. It wasn't a key to an apartment. It wasn't a public declaration in front of his family. It was something more profound. It was the act of walking away from a life he was supposed to live and walking toward an unknown future with me. It was a tangible act of commitment, a promise made not with words, but with a single, decisive action. I looked from his earnest, tired face to my own reflection in the dark screen of the television. I saw a man I barely recognized, someone on the precipice of everything he'd ever wanted and feared. I squeezed his hand. Okay, I said. My voice was clear and steady. Let's go. We didn't pack. We didn't look back. We walked out of the suite, leaving the discarded suit on the floor like a snakeskin. We walked past the curious glances of the hotel staff, past the floral arrangements wilting in the lobby. We walked out of the grand entrance and into the bright, chaotic noise of the city. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't retreating into my fortress. I was walking into the world, and I wasn't alone. 3 months later, I woke to the smell of coffee. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through the large window of my small apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a Saturday. There was no wedding, no hotel, no impending doom. There was just the gentle clink of ceramic on wood, the soft hiss of the radiator, and the low hum of the city waking up outside. He rolled over. Julian was there, standing by my little kitchen counter, wearing a pair of my gray sweatpants that were too short on him and an old t-shirt. He was concentrating, carefully pouring hot water over coffee grounds in the dripper I used every morning. He wasn't the powerful lawyer or the perfect groom anymore. He was just Julian, his hair uncombed, a slight furrow of concentration on his brow as he performed this small, domestic ritual. He glanced over and saw I was awake. A slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. It was a smile I had rarely seen before that day at the hotel, and now it was as much a part of my morning as the sunrise. Morning, he said, his voice still a little rough with sleep. Morning, I replied, my own voice soft. There was no anxiety, no fear of him disappearing. The frantic, trapped bird in my chest had finally settled. It wasn't gone, but it was quiet, content to rest. The mornings were no longer a crucible of doubt. They were just mornings. Shared. He brought a mug over to the bed, the one with a chipped rim that I'd had for years. He handed it to me, our fingers brushing. The touch no longer sent a jolt of panic through me. It was just a spark of warmth, familiar and comforting. He sat on the edge of the bed, sipping from his own mug. We didn't speak for a few minutes, just existing in the comfortable silence, a silence that was no longer a weight but shared space. It was the kind of quiet that only comes from complete trust. The fallout from the wedding had been immense. His family had, for all intents and purposes, disowned him. His father refused to speak to him. He had left his job at the prestigious law firm, unable to face the gossip and the pitying looks from colleagues who were all friends of his family or Clara's. His life had been systematically dismantled, but sitting here in my sun-drenched apartment, he had never looked more whole. I looked around my small fortress. It wasn't a fortress anymore. His running shoes were by the door, next to my worn-out loafers. His thick legal thriller was on my nightstand, its spine broken. His toothbrush was in the holder next to mine. My quiet, orderly world had been disrupted, infiltrated, and completely rearranged, and it had never felt more like home. Julian was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the disruption that had shattered my routine, the force of nature that had torn down my walls. But I had been wrong to fear him. He hadn't destroyed my world. He had just blasted it open, letting in the light. He had shown me that the safety of my fortress was just another word for a prison. He turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest. I thought about the man in the tailored suit across the ballroom, a beautiful, unattainable stranger. I thought about the desperate man in the hotel suite, drowning in a life that wasn't his. And I looked at the man beside me now, relaxed and real in the morning light. My journey had been from a state of solitude and fear to this simple, profound moment of connection. I had been so afraid of the emotional risk, so certain that my longing would only lead to pain. But the real pain I now understood was in the hiding, in the silence. The risk wasn't in loving him. The risk was in never telling him, in living a half-life defined by what I couldn't have. "I'm thinking," I said, meeting his gaze, "that I'm glad you crashed my room." His smile widened, and he leaned in and kissed me. It was a soft, simple kiss, tasting of coffee and the promise of a new day. It was a kiss that held no questions, no desperation, no sorrow for lost time. It was just a beginning, a new, quiet, shared routine. He was the disruption that led me to myself, the chaos that brought me peace. My life was no longer a collection of quiet, solitary moments. It was a shared story, one we were finally writing together. And it was so much better than anything I could have ever imagined alone in my fortress. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed the trajectory of your life, for better or for worse? A single conversation or choice that split your world into a before and an after? Let me know your own stories or thoughts about taking huge emotional risks in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more narratives about love, connection, and the difficult, beautiful journey to finding ourselves.